So the hobby question that we're going to explore, the narrative that we're going to ask, has Warhammer 40,000 shifted in terms of how the game is played? Has it shifted in terms of how the hobby is presented? And this is some interesting trends that I've noticed with Games Workshop, not only accelerating the models that they're pushing out, but also accelerating the change and the fluctuation in rules. Now, before we jump into that, and we're going to ask the question, box sets. The driving force of the hobby right now seems to be box sets and limited releases compared to the previous push of a regular stream of models or a regular stream of updated components. Now, I do understand the perception of Warhammer 40,000 is not just one thing. There are lots of ways to explore the game, and a lot is going to depend on literally your meta. The example I use for that, you might be part of a gaming group, and when I say group, it might be an established club, or it might be part of a store, or it could just be basement battle reports, 4 or 5 friends getting together to roll some dice and blow some stuff up. My early genesis, my early DNA of 40K for a number of years was just Friday night getting together with my 4 friends and playing 40K. It's only very, very recently in the past 10 years or so that I've really plugged into a number of gaming communities and bigger types of groups. So I say that because there is this perception, or there was a perception for the longest time, that Warhammer 40K is tournament-based. It's narrative-based. And certainly Games Workshop has never pushed and promoted that angle. Yes, years ago they used to support the grand tournaments. They used to support Games Day. They actually used to send prize support if you were running Rogue Trader type events. But it was clear that they were pushing models. They were a model company. They were a hobby company. And around 5th edition, 6th edition 40K, I mean, we're going back a number of years, that was kind of the explosion of competitive gameplay, being able to take 40K and really play it from a tournament perspective. That was possible to some extent because the release schedule of new codexes, of new models and new units was much, much slower. It wasn't as dynamic as it was right now. So what you found was, yes, in each tournament season, you had to now shift and purchase new models and play competitively, but it was manageable, even with the introduction of Knights, which started to shift things years ago. Well, now if we look at 40K, and this is a good thing, the release schedule is very, very fast. They're pushing out lots of updates. They're pushing out lots of kits. There's a lot of crossover. I wouldn't say slow it down, because the more 40K, the better. But if you're trying to keep up with the meta, if you're trying to keep up from that perspective of in this moment, snapshot, right now, where 40K is, in this vlog, with your video, with what you're watching on YouTube, to keep up with that, it requires a lot. And with it literally changing every month, every 2 months, how do you do that from a competitive perspective? Now, there are players that play that way, but is that the majority of the community? So we've seen this massive shift where Games Workshop is pushing out a lot. On top of that, and this is not a criticism, the rules they're never tested. They're not play tested. They've got some focus groups. They've got some feedback from the community. But 40K is just so complex and has so many moving parts that need to be regularly updated and that put pressure on each other. I'm not saying that it should be a tight competitive rule set, or it shouldn't be a tight rule set, say, look like Chain of Command, Historicals, which is a fantastic rule set. 40K, if it goes to that, yes, the game will be a lot more dynamic. The game would be more competitive. But honestly, would that kill some of the fun? Would that kill some of the possibility? Would that kill off some of the narrative? This idea of releasing new kits and releasing new rules and playing it from that perspective. So looking at that, while I do wish some of the rules were a little bit more tighter, I do appreciate the fluidity. But if we look at 40K right now, constant releases. Now let's layer on to the next part. Then we're going to jump into the box sets. But I felt like I kind of had to lay that foundation. For those of you new to 40K, this is kind of all you know, and it's pushing in that direction. But if you've been playing for 40K for a while, I think the past really does influence you. And sometimes it's hard to see how Games Workshop is really, really pivoting and pushing from that direction. What we also see with the release schedule is, and this makes sense from the perspective of a model company, from a perspective of trying to push out models, you either get on board and buy it now, or that's it. You've missed the release and you'll be forced to go to the secondary market, or you'll be forced to kind of look elsewhere. And we used to see this type of release schedule with what used to be known as the specialist games or the boxed games. A great example of that would be Warhammer Quest, Blackstone Fortress. This was a release that just went dormant. We've got Cursed City coming online, which I am excited for. But when Blackstone Fortress was released, and I'm calling it the specialist games, that's kind of an older term, but when they reactivated some of these specialist games, the promise was, and especially with Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress, hey, guys, it's going to be supported for a long time. There's going to be a lot of releases, and you're going to be able to readily purchase it. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. The releases were very fast, and I appreciate the content, but we quickly learned with Blackstone Fortress, and we see this on Age of Sigmar, on that side too, if you miss the season, if you miss the cycle, if you miss the drop, that's it. It's done. So they are increasing this push out. They're increasing this push out. How do you keep up with that? The traditional army method of you pick a faction, you buy a core, right? Someone to lead your faction, maybe some vehicles, a bunch of infantry, maybe one or two special units, and you play with it, and then over time you kind of grow your collection. I don't think that's sustainable, even from a rules selection. So now what we're seeing is the shift to box sets, and this is what I wondered with the mega boxes dropping. The value is fantastic. The sculpts are fantastic. You're seeing options now where it's truly plug and play in a box, where you've got terrain and you've got everything that you need to play. These are limited releases. And what I'm asking myself is, are they becoming a narrative company? Are they expecting you in the hobby seasonally with each release to purchase the boxed set? So if I'm playing 40K, I'm literally buying these themed box sets. They're taking a theme from the narrative, a special battle from the narrative. And in the past, when they did this with the box sets, it was to give you some models, give you a little taste, and get you into the hobby. Well, now it's a standalone product almost. This idea where instead of pulling armies off my shelf to play, or I've got the Grey Knights or the Fritz Tyranids, I'm going to have my box sets, and I'm going to pull the box set off and play it with my opponent, play it with my friends. I see 40K going full on narrative, where you have this accelerated cycle of release of box sets, and players buying them, players collecting them, and almost playing that battle, playing it from that perspective, exploring 40K from that perspective. I could kind of see armies winding down. We're not here yet. But the comparison I would use was a few years ago when they advanced the timeline, and it was like, all right, Primaris Marines are out. And we were like, what does that really mean? They're released, they're out. It's a special elite unit. Now we see Primaris was to replace the mini Marines, get everyone to buy new Space Marines, get everyone to buy in on all new models. The massive base of Space Marine players, well, now you have to rebuy everything, and they've shifted to Primaris. I think the scale is better. I certainly think they're a little bit more dynamic, but we saw this massive shift in 40K for Space Marines from that perspective. Do we see a parallel shift where the traditional army method is done? Now you buy these limited edition box sets, and it is FOMO. You get on board or you don't. You get out. And just like the focus right now is narrative in the game, but there are ways to play competitively and there are tournaments, is that going to shift where we're going to see you could still buy units here and there and play games with your friends, but where 40K is going to be, get on board with the box set, and there's going to be, one every 2 or 3 months, and it's going to follow the storyline, and I'm going to buy this box set, and I'm going to buy that box set, and I'm going to buy this one. And instead of purchasing a unit here and there, instead of spending realistically, the old model after you have realistically and 40K don't go together, right? Because we're always buying new models. But realistically, after you've purchased the bulk of your first army, then the idea was maybe every other month or every couple of months, I add something new to play. So if I'm dropping every 2 or 3 months, again, realistically, if I'm dropping, let's say $100 for 1 unit, 2 units, some stuff, Games Workshop is looking, and I think what they're looking at is saying, well, let's redo that model. Let's get these players to buy, I think they're testing the waters, a $300 box set. Let's get them on a subscription model where we're going to send them a bunch of orcs. We're going to send them a bunch of Necrons. We're going to send them a bunch of Tyranids. Let's get them spending $150, $200, $300, $400 a month. That's where I see 40K, or that's where I could potentially see 40K going. The shift for a long time has been pushing narrative. I think it's going to go to seasons, subscriptions, and purchasing box sets to get that grim dark immersion. And I could see them phasing out the old buy an army, slowly add to it, build it up method, because there's just no continuation to buy more and more and more potentially from that model. All right, turning it over to the comments. Your thoughts, your ideas on it, and this direction, potential direction of 40K. What do you guys see? What do you guys think?